what Henry Percy actually unleashed inside the Tower of London. For 1,000 years, its stone walls have stood as a symbol of royal power, a fortress of secrets, and a cage for the enemies of the crown. Its history is written in blood and paranoia, a place where queens lost their heads and conspirators were lost to the world. But within these grim ramparts, nestled between tales of torture and treason, lies another story. It's not about a body being broken, but about a mind being unleashed. It's the story of a man who turned the ultimate symbol of his confinement into one of the greatest laboratories in England. This is the story of Henry Percy, the 9th Earl of Northumberland, a man history remembers as a prisoner, but whom the whispers of the past call the Wizard Earl. And the secret he was chasing in the heart of the king's own fortress was a new kind of power, a new kind of magic that threatened to redefine the world itself. For nearly 16 years, Henry Percy, the Wizard Earl, was a prisoner in the Tower of London. History tells us he was a nobleman paying the price for treason. But what if that's only half the story? What if the tower wasn't just his prison, but his laboratory? And what if the secrets he was hunting in the stars threatened the crown far more than any army? In the heart of the kingdom's most secure fortress, the Wizard Earl was on the verge of unleashing something, and it wasn't just knowledge. The gilded cage and the gunpowder treason. To understand the wizard, you first have to understand the prisoner. Our story kicks off in November of 1605, a moment of absolute crisis for the English monarchy. A plot so audacious it's hard to even imagine had just been stopped in its tracks. 36 barrels of gunpowder had been found in a cellar right under the House of Lords, enough to blow the entire ruling class of England to kingdom come. The king, James I, his ministers, the bishops, the judges, and Parliament would have been annihilated. The investigation that followed was swift and brutal. The now infamous Guy Fawkes was captured with the gunpowder, and under torture, he and his co-conspirators started naming names. One name that surfaced, tangled in a web of association and suspicion, was Henry Percy, the 9th Earl of Northumberland. Percy was one of the most powerful and wealthiest men in England, a titan of the old northern aristocracy. But his family tree was shadowed by rebellion, and he himself was a man of contradictions. While he was a Protestant, he was known to be a vocal sympathizer for England's persecuted Catholic minority. He'd been key in smoothing King James's path to the throne, yet he was notoriously proud and quick to criticize the new king when he felt he wasn't getting the respect he deserved. The critical link was his own kinsman and rent collector, Thomas Percy, who was one of the main plotters. In the tense days leading up to the plot's discovery, Henry had met with Thomas. This association was enough to cast a dark shadow of complicity over the Earl. Was he the mastermind, the powerful patron behind it all? King James and his chief minister, Robert Cecil, certainly had their suspicions. A man of Percy's stature could provide the resources and legitimacy that a band of provincial Catholics lacked. He fit the profile. Henry Percy was arrested and thrown into the Tower. He furiously protested his innocence, and honestly, the government's case was flimsy. The plotters themselves, before their own brutal ends, seemed to confirm the Earl wasn't involved. But in the climate of fear after the gunpowder plot, mere suspicion could be a death sentence for your freedom. The Crown couldn't prove he was a traitor, but they couldn't afford to believe he was innocent. So, they reached a compromise. Instead of the executioner's axe, Percy was tried in the Star Chamber. He was convicted not of treason, but of misprision of treason, basically for looking the other way. The official charges were that he had made Thomas Percy a royal bodyguard, without him taking the proper anti-Catholic oath, and that he hadn't done enough to stop him once the plot was underway. The verdict? A life sentence in the Tower of London and a staggering fine of £30,000. Millions in today's money. In June of 1606, the gates of the tower closed behind him, seemingly for the rest of his life. The world saw a great lord brought low. But this wasn't your typical story of a state prisoner wasting away in a damp cell. The tower is a complex of buildings. While some were grim dungeons, Percy's status and his deep pockets bought him a very different experience. He was given comfortable lodgings, likely in the Martin Tower on the outer wall. And this is where the story of the prisoner ends, and the story of the wizard truly begins. Percy, still a rich man even with that colossal fine, essentially started renovating. He turned his apartments into one of the most luxurious private residences in London. He had servants, lavish meals, and a steady stream of visitors, including his own children. Legend even says he had a covered bowling alley built for recreation. For nearly 16 years, from 1606 to 1621, Henry Percy held court inside the very fortress meant to contain him. His prison became his palace, but it became something more. While his body was confined, his mind began to travel further than any of his contemporaries. He had always been a man of intense intellectual curiosity, a patron of science and the arts. Now, faced with a lifetime of forced leisure, he went all in. He began shipping vast quantities of books into his tower apartments, assembling one of the greatest private libraries in England. The subjects were broad, but they all pointed to one goal: the discovery of hidden knowledge. Cartography, medicine, mathematics, astronomy, and the discipline that would seal his reputation. Alchemy. While the king worried about politics and paranoia, a different kind of power was gathering inside the Martin Tower. Percy wasn't just reading. He was funding a revolution. He gathered a circle of the most brilliant and controversial minds of the age, men known to history as his three magi: Thomas Harriot, Walter Warner, and Robert Hughes. Together, right in the heart of the tower, they began a series of investigations that pushed the boundaries of known science. They peered through telescopes, mixed volatile chemicals, and charted the very fabric of the cosmos. To the outside world, and especially to a king like James I, who was obsessed with the threat of witchcraft, these activities were deeply suspicious. The Earl, already a political stain, was now dabbling in what many saw as the dark arts. The whispers started. They called him the Wizard Earl. They pictured him in a smoke-filled room, trying to conjure spirits or turn lead into gold. But the truth was far more complex, and in its own way, far more dangerous. Henry Percy wasn't trying to summon a demon. He was trying to quantify the universe, and in doing so, he was about to unleash an idea far more subversive than any gunpowder plot. The secret workshop in the tower. To really get what was happening inside the Martin Tower, you have to forget the hard line we draw today between science and magic. In the early 17th century, that line was incredibly blurry. The quest for knowledge was called natural philosophy, a grand attempt to understand the mind of God by studying his creation. Alchemy wasn't just a greedy hunt for gold. It was a spiritual process, a belief that purifying metals could help you understand how to purify the soul. Astrology wasn't just fortune-telling. It was a complex mathematical science that assumed the heavens above were reflected in the human body below. This was the world Henry Percy and his circle lived in, and the king who locked him up, James I, was a man who believed in all this stuff, but from a place of deep fear. James had personally overseen witch trials in Scotland, and even wrote a book, Demonology, about the reality of witchcraft and the need to stamp it out. To him, any knowledge sought outside the church and the crown was potentially demonic. In this climate of suspicion, the work Percy was funding was inherently dangerous. At the center of it all was the quiet, brilliant genius, Thomas Harriot. Harriot was a top-tier mathematician and astronomer whose discoveries rivaled, and sometimes even came before, his more famous European contemporaries. With Percy now in the tower, the focus of their collaboration shifted to the Earl's gilded cage, though Harriot's main laboratory and observatory remained at Percy's estate, Scion House. And what work it was! While Galileo gets the credit for first turning a telescope to the sky, we know Thomas Harriot was doing the exact same thing right here in England. In 1609, months before Galileo published his findings, Harriot sketched the surface of the moon from his post at Scion House. He saw it wasn't a perfect glassy sphere like the church taught, but a world of mountains and craters, a physical place. He was also one of the first Europeans to document sunspots, imperfections on the face of the supposedly flawless sun. These weren't just observations. They were cracks in the foundation of the medieval worldview. Inside the tower, this spirit of inquiry continued. Percy and his magi conducted experiments in optics, exploring how light worked, knowledge they needed to build better telescopes. They delved into ballistics, studying the physics of motion and gravity to describe the rules governing the physical world. Then there was the alchemy. Percy's library was full of alchemical texts, and accounts confirm experiments were happening in the tower. But this wasn't just about a sorcerer trying to cook up an elixir of life. It was a messy, smelly, frustrating mix of early experimental chemistry and age-old mysticism. They were performing distillations, trying to understand the composition of matter. They experimented with tobacco, a new and exotic plant from the Americas, analyzing its properties. There are even apocryphal tales of Percy trying to create powders from strange ingredients like viper's flesh, a practice that sounds bizarre to us, but was part of 17th century pharmacology. Every failed experiment was a piece of data. They were building a new understanding of the material world, one attempt at a time. This quest for knowledge had real-world implications. Percy's circle was obsessed with cartography and exploration. His friend and fellow prisoner for a time, Sir Walter Raleigh, was a key figure in England's New World ambitions. Better navigational tools developed by thinkers like Harriot could guide English ships across the Atlantic. While it's an overstatement to say their tower work directly saved the struggling Jamestown colony, this kind of knowledge, accurate maps, better navigation, understanding new resources, wasn't just an academic game. It was a tool of empire. But let's bring it back to that room in the tower. Imagine it, a lavish prison suite, filled with books, charts, strange instruments, and the chemical smell of discovery. The Earl, a proud nobleman stripped of his political power, is pouring his fortune and his intellect into this new pursuit. He and his scholars are writing to thinkers across Europe, sharing data, debating theories. He essentially created a private university inside a state prison. The real threat here wasn't that Percy would magically escape. The threat was the knowledge itself. An autocratic monarchy like James I's depends on controlling the story. Percy was creating an independent source of truth. He was proving that truth wasn't something handed down by a king or a bishop, but something you could discover for yourself through observation and math. Think about it. If the heavens weren't perfect, then the divine right of kings, the idea that a monarch's power comes from a perfect God in a perfect heaven, starts to look a little shaky. And in an age where a king's power was tied to his wealth, the idea of creating gold was a threat. It was an attempt to seize control over the very basis of economic power. What was truly being unleashed inside the tower wasn't a spirit. It was the spirit of the scientific revolution. It was the birth of empiricism in England, happening right under the nose of a king who feared and distrusted it. The nickname Wizard Earl was meant as an insult, a way to paint him as a freak dabbling in forbidden things. But in a way, it was dead on. In an age of superstition, a man who could map the moon or predict a comet's path was a kind of wizard. His power just came from reason and observation, and that kind of magic was about to change the world. The legacy of a dangerous mind. In 1621, after nearly 16 years, the political winds had shifted. Percy's great rival was long dead, and the king was desperate for money and allies. Through the influence of his powerful son-in-law, Henry Percy, the Wizard Earl, was finally freed. The story goes he was almost reluctant to leave his comfortable and productive prison, but he eventually returned to his estates. He entered the tower in middle age and emerged an old man. He never took part in public life again and died in 1632. On the surface, it looks like his story just ends. A nobleman who got tangled up in power politics and spent his prison years on weird hobbies. But that misses the point entirely. The thing he unleashed from the tower wasn't a single discovery. It was a way of thinking. It was a network. It was an intellectual inheritance that would ripple through the coming decades. Take Thomas Harriot, the genius at the center of his circle. He died shortly after Percy's release and published very little, so his name was mostly forgotten for centuries. But his notes survived, filled with groundbreaking math and detailed astronomical drawings. They show a mind working at the absolute cutting edge. Without Percy's money and protection, it's unlikely Harriot would have had the freedom to do what he did. Percy gave him more than a paycheck. He gave him a community inside the strange ecosystem of the tower. The knowledge grown by Percy's circle fed directly into the scientific culture of 17th century England. Their work on optics, math, and astronomy laid the groundwork for the next generation. A few decades after Percy's death, these informal networks would formalize into the Royal Society of London, one of the most important scientific institutions in the world. There's no direct line from Percy's lab to the Royal Society, but the spirit is the same. Challenge everything, test your ideas, and share what you learn. The spirit of the Martin Tower found its ultimate expression there. But the legacy is even bigger than that. The most dangerous thing Percy unleashed was the idea of intellectual defiance. He proved that even when you're physically locked down, your mind can't be imprisoned. He turned the ultimate symbol of the state's power, the Tower of London, into a beacon of independent thought. That was profoundly subversive. The king could take his freedom and his money, but he couldn't stop him from mapping the moon. This idea that an individual with reason and the right tools could uncover truths about the universe was the engine of the Enlightenment that would sweep Europe in the next century. Percy's quiet rebellion in the tower was a preview of that larger shift. He was an old-world aristocrat who, through his passions, became a herald of the new world. His story also explains the wizard label. We love the idea of him as a sorcerer because it's a great Gothic tale. But the reality is way more interesting. He was called a wizard not for practicing black magic, but because his science was so advanced, it looked like magic to the people of his time. The real secret of the Wizard Earl wasn't a spell. It was the realization that the universe is a book written in the language of math, and with the right key, anyone can learn to read it. That power didn't belong to kings or priests. It belonged to anyone with the curiosity to ask and the grit to find an answer. What Henry Percy actually unleashed inside the tower was the modern mind. He entered the fortress a political prisoner and left it as one of England's great patrons of modern science, having turned his punishment into a 16-year-long experiment that proved knowledge could never be contained by stone walls. The story of the wizard Earl is a powerful reminder that history is full of secrets hidden in plain sight. If you enjoyed this journey into the hidden life of Henry Percy, make sure you subscribe and click the bell icon so you don't miss our next investigation into the past. There are countless other figures whose official stories hide a much more fascinating reality. Who should we investigate next? Let us know your theories and suggestions in the comments below. So, what did Henry Percy truly unleash? It wasn't a phantom or an alchemical monster. The force he set loose from his prison workshop was the revolutionary power of empirical evidence. For nearly 16 years, while the kingdom buzzed with politics, the wizard Earl led a quiet rebellion in his laboratory. He turned a symbol of royal authority into a hub of scientific inquiry, proving that stone walls can't contain the human mind. He didn't need to blow up Parliament to challenge the crown. He did it by charting the heavens, questioning the nature of matter, and supporting a circle of thinkers who valued observation over dogma. The legacy of the wizard Earl isn't one of sorcery, but of science. He's a testament to a time when the search for knowledge was itself an act of defiance, and the most dangerous weapon against a world of superstition was simply a new way of seeing.